Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 best-selling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can find out even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Natalie Saunders. She is the author of a wonderful new book called The Chi of Tea. Natalie Saunders is an author, an acupuncturist, massage therapist, and is currently studying herbs. You can find out more about Natalie and her work at her website, radixtcm.com. That's radixtcm.com. Welcome, Natalie Saunders.
Hi, Catherine. Thanks so much for having me on the show. It's great to be here.
Now, Natalie Saunders, what was the inspiration behind your book, The Chi of Tea?
Well, as an acupuncturist, I've spent several years in China as part of my training. And while I was there, I became really interested in tea. As I'm sure you know, tea is a really central part of Chinese culture, and it's very important to everyday life. And Chinese medicine is also a massive part of Chinese culture, and this is really my passion. So I was interested to see how tea and Chinese medicine fitted in together. So as I'm sure you know, Chinese medicine is based a lot on the concept of qi. So qi is one of these terms that we hear thrown around quite a lot, but not many people are actually sure exactly what it means. So qi is one of these words that is really difficult to translate into the English language. There's no direct translation, and most people translate it as life force or energy. But really, if you look at the Chinese character, the actual meaning is closer to gas or vapor. So the idea is that inside our body, we have this kind of soup of qi, which is made up from our DNA and our traits that we've inherited from our parents. When this is warmed up by our internal fire, it turns to steam. And it's this steam which circulates around our bodies as qi. So the idea is that you have a cup of tea with this steam coming off it. And it's like the qi which is circulating around our body. So I could really see a parallel there. And the other thing which came to my mind was one of my old acupuncture teachers, when he was explaining the meaning of the word qi, he used this analogy of an orange. So we know if we find an orange, if we bite into it, it's going to be juicy, it's going to be sweet, it's going to be orangey, right? So the idea is that the qi of the orange is what makes the orange an orange and not an apple, not a banana. And your qi is what makes you you, my qi is what makes me me. And in the same way, the qi of tea is what makes tea tea and not coffee or orange juice or soda or anything else. So that was the inspiration behind the title, and that's the idea behind the book, how Chinese medicine and tea are related to one another.
That's really fascinating. Now, of course, people all over the world enjoy tea. I know this morning I had a cup of jasmine green tea with my breakfast. Nice. And I had, the fresh leaves, and I, diffused it in a pot, very delicious. And yet there are teas from literally all over the world, and people all over the world enjoy tea. How does the attitude towards tea differ in Asia from here in the Western world?
Well, actually, it's in some ways very similar, and in some ways it's very different. So you were mentioning that you brewed up your jasmine tea this morning from the leaves in a teapot, which is fantastic. That's the best way to enjoy tea. So many people in the West use tea bags, and we add milk and we add sugar, which, it is enjoyable in its own right, but it's not really tea, as it was first intended to be drunk. So, tea originated many thousands of years ago in China, and it's been drunk there ever since. And it's really just grown in popularity and spread across the whole world. So the attitude is similar in that tea is something which is really revered. Here in the West, you often hear people saying, oh, I really need a cup of tea after you've had a stressful day or a shock or something like that. You'll sit down with a nice cup of tea and relax. And in China, the attitude is the same, but the amount of effort that goes into the preparing of the tea is so much more. So as I'm sure you know, in China, Japan and Korea, they all have different versions of the tea ceremony where tea is prepared very slowly and ritualistically, and smelling the tea before you drink it. This is all a very important part of enjoying the drink itself. So whereas tea in the West is a very important part of everyday life, in Asia and in China, it's very much revered. It's something which is really special. And depending on what type of tea you buy, it can be incredibly expensive. So if somebody gives you a gift of tea, this is seen as, something really special. This person, must really appreciate me if they've given me this gift of tea, because you can spend, literally pounds and pounds on a small sachet of tea. It's incredible.
Well, I know that in England, I lived in England actually twice. And one of the things that I love about English rituals is that at 4 o'clock, you literally have tea. And as you know, being a healer yourself, the adrenal glands make a major downshift about 4 p.m. at tea time. So, I joke with my American clients because here in the US, we just keep going. We're supposed to, work all afternoon and keep going and keep our energy up. I'm like, the English have it all figured out because you drink caffeine and eat sugar about 4 o'clock. Not necessarily that the sugar is required, but, there's some wisdom about, having a cup of tea and something to eat at 4 o'clock. How did the ritual of having tea at tea time at 4 p.m. originate in the UK?
Well, tea was first brought to the UK by a princess called Catherine de Braganza. She was the wife of Charles II, and she was actually a Portuguese princess. And when she first came over to the UK, she brought tea with her. And at first, it was very much a drink of the upper classes. These people had time to sit around and, have their tea, have their cake. They didn't need to go out and work in the fields. So they could just enjoy the ritual of having tea whenever they wanted to. They were very lucky. So really, it was, around about this time that tea and the ritual of afternoon tea started to become popular.
And what century would that have been for our non-historian listeners?
That would have been the, 17th century. So yeah, the 1600s.
Yeah, very good. So the English have been having tea time since the 1600s.
Absolutely. And it's just got more and more popular ever since.
And, of course, we can make tea time healthier for sure. Like we can forego the sweets and we can forego the cakes and the cookies and so on. But I think there's a lot of wisdom to sitting down, taking a pause at this time when our adrenal glands make a major downshift. And, we're talking about your book, The Chi of Tea. Well, again, another word of chi is energy. And you have kidneys. And on top of your kidneys are two little glands called the adrenal glands. Your adrenal glands secrete adrenaline and cortisol. And there's major times in the day when your adrenal glands make downshifts. So you have more energy literally first thing in the morning, and your adrenal functions at the highest at that time. And then there's another downshift around noon, and then another downshift around 4, which is again tea time, and then another downshift at bedtime around 10 p.m. So from your perspective as an acupuncturist and a healer, how do you think the practice of tea time is beneficial to preserving our energy and maintaining good energy throughout the day?
Well, it's really interesting, actually, that you point out about the downshift in our adrenal glands around about 4 p.m. Because in Chinese medicine, there is a body clock, so to speak. So the idea is that each organ goes through 2-hour periods where they're at their peak and we're at their lowest point of function. So the kidneys, the peak of time is between 3 and 5 p.m. So it's very interesting, that ties in with this time when the adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidneys, go into this kind of downshift. So yeah, it's very interesting from that point of view, certainly.
Yeah, I know that when I'm doing medical intuitive readings, a lot of times I will figure out if people are feeling off at certain times of day. I read this body clock like you're talking about, beginning with lung time from 5 to 7 a.m., right? So you take a breath, then the next time from 7 to 9 is large intestine, and so on. So there's different acupuncture meridians and organs that are more active. But this tea time corresponds to our kidneys. So how do you think that tea, especially when we prepare it right, really nourishes our kidney chi?
Well, the kidneys are really the powerhouse of our bodies. They're responsible for our drive and our willpower, and basically for keeping us going. If our kidneys are weak, we can feel very fatigued, tired, and just like we're not able to go on. So from that point of view, tea can be really beneficial. So as most people know, tea contains caffeine, which is a stimulant. So if you're feeling tired, sluggish, like you've got no energy, tea can, certainly help from that point of view. That caffeine can give you an extra little boost and just kind of get you through the day. And the difference between the caffeine in tea and the caffeine in coffee is that tea also contains other compounds which kind of balance out that caffeine high. So you don't get the wired feeling that you get with coffee sometimes when you drink tea.
Yes, and then of course there's black tea, and then there's green tea and white tea and herb tea. So which we're going to talk about in a moment. So a lot of people, as you know, Natalie, are very sensitive to caffeine, and they really cannot tolerate coffee. If you know that you're sensitive to caffeine, what sort of teas would you, as an acupuncturist, recommend that they drink instead of coffee?
Well, I mean, there are many different types of tea that come from the tea plant itself. So all of the types of tea that you mentioned, green tea, white tea, and black tea, all come from the same plant, Camellia sinensis. And they are prepared in slightly different ways, which is what gives them their different flavors and their different properties. And the green tea and white tea, they come from the very, very young tips of the plant, whereas black teas come from slightly older leaves, which is why black tea contains more caffeine. So green tea and white tea contain relatively less caffeine compared to black tea, but they do still have a little bit of caffeine in there. So if somebody is super sensitive to caffeine and they don't want anything at all, they could try different drinks. They could try herbal teas, they could try rooibos tea, they could try yerba mate, which is a traditional tea which is drunk in South America, which is reported to be very energizing. So there are loads of different options. It just depends on the individual.
Now, Natalie Saunders, author of the book, The Chi of Tea, what are the major health benefits of tea?
Well, aside from the energy boost that you get from the caffeine, there are heaps of different benefits from tea. And most of them come from chemicals which are found in the tea plant called flavonoids. These flavonoids have really powerful antioxidant qualities. So antioxidants are compounds which help to reduce oxidative stress. Now, oxidative stress, as I'm sure you know, is the cause of many, many serious diseases, from, heart disease, diabetes. It's been linked to certain types of cancer, chronic inflammation, and so on. So antioxidants actually help to slow down this process, and in that way they can help to, reduce your chances of developing these kind of diseases. Tea is also really good for if you're trying to lose weight. If you drink tea with no sugar, no milk, it's basically 0 calories, which is fantastic. And the fact that it has caffeine in also means that it can give you a little bit of extra energy. If you're on your way to the gym, you can drink a cup of green tea and it will help to give you a little extra boost as you're working out. Tea is good for bone health. It can help to protect against osteoporosis. And it's very calming, very relaxing. So, it can help if you're feeling anxious. You can drink a cup of tea and, just relax, feel calm.
Now, you mentioned something really interesting, which is talking about the calming effects of tea. And I'd like for our audience to explain something. So your whole body is like one big hologram. And on the very tip of your tongue is a reflex point that goes to your amygdala. Now, what are your amygdalae? You actually have 2 of them. So you have a brain, you've heard, I've heard, we've all heard. Inside of your brain, there are these little organs called amygdalae. and they're the shape of footballs. And if you go above your ears, about 2 inches into your brain, you'll find your amygdala. Now, the way I like to explain your amygdala is that there are like they're like the control towers at the airport. They direct energy. So when information comes into your brain and goes to the amygdala decides, oh, I'm safe, I can relax. And when you feel safe and you can relax, the amygdala direct the signals to the frontal lobes where you produce your own natural tranquilizers, you produce your serotonin and your GABA, and you can think logically. If, on the other hand, the information comes into the back, the amygdala, and you don't feel safe, you go into fight, flight, or freeze, and the information gets relayed to the back of your brain, your reptilian brain, where you're simply reacting. And again, you're going into fight, flight, or freeze. Now, back to drinking tea, back to your tongue. On the tip of your tongue, on the very tip of your tongue, is a reflex point to your amygdala. And that is why so many people overeat in order to try and calm down. Now, the thing is, you don't need to overeat. You don't need to eat cakes or cookies or a gallon of ice cream. You can simply drink a non-caffeinated drink that calms you, or something with less caffeine like white tea or green tea. And it's going to have a very calming effect. Or even drinking plain water. When you're sipping on water, you're signaling to the amygdala, I'm safe, I can calm down. And it is a very simple way of just getting out of fight or flight. And so this is a really helpful natural healing remedy for people who suffer from anxiety. So if you're suffering from anxiety or even anger or any of the emergency emotions, a very simple thing to do is to drink water or simply sit down and drink a cup of tea. Natalie Saunders, author of The Chi of Tea, what are your comments about calming and drinking tea?
I totally agree with you. I mean, there's something even just about the act of making the tea and sitting down and drinking it, which is quite calming in itself. I think, the ritual of brewing tea, especially if you do it using proper tea leaves and a teapot rather than instant tea bags, it kind of gets you into that mindset. It's kind of almost like a mini meditation.
That's right. Paying attention to what you're doing and so on, right?
Exactly.
Yes. Now, Natalie Saunders, what are the major health benefits of tea? From my understanding, tea contains phytochemicals such as catechins, which are incredibly helpful. So, can you share with us a little bit more about the health benefits of tea?
Absolutely. So as I already mentioned, tea contains loads of really health-giving compounds called flavonoids and catechins, which have antioxidant properties, which gives them this, wide range of positive effects throughout the body. And from a Chinese medicine point of view, tea is also very beneficial. So in Chinese medicine, people are seen as having different constitutions. So some people have a more yin or a more cold constitution, whereas some people have a more yang or a more hot constitution. And depending on your constitution, you can choose different teas, which will help to bring about a state of balance within your body. So Chinese medicine is all about balance, right? So for example, if you have a cold constitution, you might find that you always feel chilly. You might have problems like aching joints. You might find that you're going to the bathroom all the time, maybe with loose bowels, that kind of thing. And if you have a hot constitution, you might find the opposite. You might be one of these people who's always breaking into the sweat, maybe very red in the face. You might find that you're easily kind of irritable. You might suffer from headaches, high blood pressure, constipation, these kind of things. So if you have a cold constitution, you want to be drinking warming teas, things that are going to heat up your body. So, for example, black tea is warming compared to green tea. So if you have a cold constitution, you should drink black tea. And if you have a hot constitution, you should drink more cooling teas like green teas and white teas. And this is kind of a really simple way to kind of try and rebalance your body, and that will help with many of the different symptoms that you experience over time. And that also goes for herbal teas too.
Yes, and I know that green tea and white tea are high in phytochemicals called the initials for which are EGCG. And green tea and white tea help with blood thinning. They boost your immune system and reduce arterial plaque. So these are very helpful for your heart and also anti-aging. Now, let's talk about another kind of tea, and I guess it's not technically a tea, but something that's very beneficial for healing also is ginger tea. And, when I make ginger tea, I'll get a fresh, little claw of ginger, wash it, slice it, and, either put it in my crock pot with some goji berries for natural sweetening, or just simply slice up some ginger, fresh ginger, and pour hot water over it. And this is very anti-inflammatory. So ginger tea is great for anybody with digestive problems. So for example, if you're suffering from nausea, ginger tea also blocks COX2 enzymes, and it is very helpful for reducing pain. So if I've got clients who are suffering from joint pain, I'll encourage them to make ginger tea. And again, a real simple way to make ginger tea is to get a crock pot, believe it or not, get a bunch of ginger, and people ask me how much, and I'm real right brain, and I'll say, well, just make it as strong as you can handle it, right, Natalie?
Absolutely.
And, slice up your ginger, and then an option is to throw in some goji berries. And goji berries are very high in beta carotene and antioxidants, but they're naturally sweet. And if you just let the fresh ginger and the goji berries simmer and drink it throughout the day, then this is a natural healing remedy that I recommend for all my clients with arthritis and any kind of joint pain. What are your comments about ginger tea?
Well, ginger is an absolutely amazing tea. Ginger is actually a very fundamental herb in traditional Chinese medicine, and it has a whole load of different uses. So as you already mentioned, it's fantastic for the digestion. And in Chinese medicine, ginger is the most important herb, which is used for nausea and vomiting. It's also a very warming herb, so it's good for people who have got that kind of yin cold constitution. It will help to warm their bodies up, to give them more fire. And it's also really great at this time of year because we're just going into cold and flu season. So a lot of people are coming down with sicknesses, and one traditional Chinese remedy for colds and flu is ginger tea. So the idea is, as soon as you get those kind of telltale signs, that little tickle at the back of your nose, the lump in your throat, you think, oh, I'm getting sick. So the first thing that you do is you take a heap of ginger, boil it up in some water for about 20 minutes. You can use goji berries to sweeten it, as you mentioned, although traditionally in China it's sweetened with some brown sugar. And you drink it while it's still very hot. And the idea is that this tea is so warming, it will make you sweat. It opens up all your pores and just allows the sickness to dissipate.
There you go. And another healthy sweetener is stevia, which is an herb that you can get, and I happen to like liquid stevia, and yet we can also have teas plain. Now let's talk about the difference between brewing actual tea leaves and then purchasing tea in tea bags. Because a lot of times people will say, I'm busy, I'm in a hurry, I don't have time, to brew tea, which is kind of funny even to think about that. But what are the problems that you see from a health perspective with tea bags? Because so many people drink tea from tea bags.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think there are any major health problems, so to speak, but certainly the tea that is in these bags is more processed, it's more milled up than the tea that you would be drinking if you were drinking freshly brewed tea. So if you buy yourself a nice good quality green tea, it's going to have far more beneficial compounds in it than if you're drinking the kind of ground up floor sweepings that may be inside your tea bag. And the other problem with drinking tea from tea bags is that people do tend to add milk and sugar, which obviously is, not so great. Whereas if you've got a really nice, good quality tea, you want to taste the flavor. You don't want to add sugar. You don't want to add milk. So it kind of gives you the opportunity to, really savor the tea on its own and drink it in its unadulterated state.
Yeah, and it's good that we're actually talking about sugar. I always joke in my next lifetime I'm going to be a baker and tell everybody to eat more chocolate cake. Whereas in this lifetime, I'm always talking about, the problem with sugar. Now, who doesn't like sugar? We all like sugar. Let's just admit that. But sugar is very pro-inflammatory, and anything that's pro-inflammatory in your body, your caffeines, your alcohol, tobacco, sugar, fried foods, glutens, all those things are going to increase the level of pain in your body and, have numerous bad health effects. What are your comments about why we really ought to think about reducing or eliminating sugar in our tea?
Well, I mean, absolutely. As you just mentioned, it is, it's so bad for us in so many different ways. Apart from causing us to gain weight and being bad for our teeth, it causes inflammation and all these other problems within our bodies. And the problem with sugar is that it's really addictive. So once you start taking sugar in your tea, it can be really difficult to stop doing that. You have to wean yourself off very gradually. So, I mean, I used to take sugar in my tea, and it took me a really long time to stop doing that. And, now the thought of having sugar in tea to me is just crazy. But I know people who do have sugar in tea and they won't drink it without. So I would say if you do need to sweeten your tea, it would be better to use substances like stevia, as you already mentioned. And another really great option for sweetening your tea is honey. Honey is, it's a traditional Chinese medicine in its own right. It has loads of great benefits for your body. It's really good for moistening the throat. So if you have sore throats and coughs, it's very good from that point of view. It's beneficial to your digestive organs. And it can moisten your bowels. So if you suffer from constipation, honey can also help from that point of view.
Yeah, I know that when I actually get a for real cold, I will suck on honey cough drops. And Manuka honey is antiviral and antibacterial. So it's very, very beneficial. And, I think the best Manuka honey probably comes from New Zealand. Wouldn't you say, Natalie?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so if you can find yourself either local honey, which is going to help you deal with allergies a little bit better, or a good Manuka honey from New Zealand, that's going to actually boost up your immune system. And, wherever you are, everywhere in the world, we all have culture and traditions. And I'm here in Atlanta. I grew up in the American South. And I just have to laugh about it because where I grew up, we have iced tea because it's hot. So you got to drink something cold to calm down, to cool down. But so we'll have what's referred to as sweet tea. So sweet tea is usually black tea with sugar. And you combine the caffeine and the sugar, and you're like this ADD child wanting to run around the block, right? And what part of the UK do you live in, Natalie?
I live in the Midlands.
And what's the tradition where you are as far as tea goes?
Well, most people tend to take it definitely with milk. And I would say probably about half of people, maybe also sugar, like 1 or 2 spoonfuls of sugar is pretty much the norm.
Yeah, so you're basically having milk and sugar with a little bit of tea.
Exactly.
Sounds wonderful. I know myself also, I really like lemon in my tea, and lemon is very beneficial for the liver, right?
Yeah, it's got that sour flavor, which is really good for the liver.
Right. Any other benefits of lemon when we're drinking lemon in our tea?
Well, as you mentioned, it's sour, so it has that really good effect on the liver. It also has astringent qualities, so it can help your body to retain fluid. So if you're somebody who sweats a lot, It can kind of help to keep the sweat within your body. And from that point of view, it's really good for like moistening your skin. So astringent herbs are often used for beauty because, you know, they help to keep the moisture within your skin, so they stop you from forming lines and wrinkles. And also lemons rich in vitamin C, so they're going to give you that little immune boost as well.
Yes, and lemon and limes, although I don't use lime in my tea, but lemon and lime contain limonene, which is a phytochemical that reduces the proliferation of cancer cells and boosts your immune system. Now, Natalie Saunders, what are the different types of tea? So if our audience is listening and we're wanting to learn more about tea, what are some of the main types of tea that we need to learn about?
Okay, so we've already talked about 3 types of tea which come from the tea plant Camellia sinensis itself. So that's green tea, white tea, and black tea. There are actually 2 other types of tea which come from the same plant. So we have yellow tea, which is very similar to white tea and green tea, but it's prepared in a slightly different way. It's actually covered with a damp cloth while it's oxidized, so it gives it a slightly different flavor. And then we have oolong tea, and oolong tea is somewhere between black tea and green tea in its level of caffeine, and it has a really nice kind of nutty flavor. I love oolong tea. I say it's probably my favorite, actually.
And from my understanding, and you'll have to clarify this for our audience, I believe that white tea is highest in antioxidants. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. It's the very, very youngest parts of the tea plant, and it undergoes the minimum amount of oxidation, so it retains most of its, you know, its helpful chemicals. So yeah, absolutely. If you're looking for a super healthy tea, then white tea is the way to go.
Now, Natalie Saunders, author of the wonderful book, The Chi of Tea, how do we go about choosing the right tea for us? Because as you mentioned, you know, you have to match your food and your drink to your constitution, and we're all different. So how do we know what's the right tea for us?
Well, you can usually take a pretty good guess. You know, you'll know if you're more of a cold person or more of a hot person. And if you're not 100% sure, you can go for a consultation with a Chinese medicine practitioner, and they will be able to tell you. They'll be able to tell you what your constitution is and what kind of tea you should be drinking and what kind of food you should be eating and so on. And the other thing to do really is to find a tea that you like. There's a school of thought that says if a tea tastes unpalatable to you, then it's probably not the right tea for you. So find a tea that you like the taste of. And of course, if you do drink a particular type of tea and you feel unwell in any way, if you find that you have symptoms which get worse when you drink this tea, or if it makes you feel kind of lightheaded or queasy at all, just stop. This is obviously not the right tea for you. So listen to your body, and it will usually tell you what it needs. And if you have any long-term medical conditions, if you're taking prescribed medication, or if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, talk to your doctor or a qualified herbalist first.
Yes, and what would you say about the difference between cold tea, like I said, here in the hot South, we drink iced tea, and warm tea? How do we know which is better for us?
Well, in Chinese medicine terms, any ice drink is really a big no-no. So our stomach and spleen are our major digestive organs in Chinese medicine terms. And our spleen really dislikes being cold. It likes to be warm, and that just kind of helps the digestive process to keep on ticking over. So when you drink cold drinks or ice drinks, it really kind of interferes with your spleen, and it stops the digestive process from being as effective as it can. And this is something which has been believed in Chinese medicine for thousands and thousands of years, and it's, you know, still something which Chinese medicine practitioners believe today. We never ever drink ice drinks. It's got to be at least room temperature, but preferably warm.
Preferably warm, yes.
Yeah.
And so if we are drinking a cold drink, perhaps that would be better to drink that separate from a meal. Because also one of the things that I know is that you want your stomach to be warm. And if you're pouring on all these cold drinks into your stomach, you're basically extinguishing your digestive fire, correct?
Absolutely. And if you drink too much with a meal, it's just going to dilute your stomach acid anyway. So it's always best just to, you know, drink away from a meal. And if you do need to drink with a meal, just a few sips here and there.
Yeah. Now, another kind of tea that we actually haven't discussed, and it's not technically a tea, but it definitely has medicinal value, is parsley tea. So when you have parsley tea, you get some fresh parsley. And again, you boil it delicately. And parsley tea is a natural healing remedy for your kidneys. How would you recommend that our audience partake of parsley tea?
Well, parsley is a very delicate herb, so you certainly don't want to brew it for too long. It's just going to disintegrate, and that's not going to taste good if you have kind of slimy parsley floating around in your tea, right? So, for brewing most herbal teas, actually, we usually recommend a temperature between 90 and 100 degrees Celsius. So, just off the boil. So if you boil your kettle, leave it to cool down for like 5-10 minutes. It's going to be about the right temperature for most herbal teas. And with the parsley tea, as I say, it's very delicate. So you just want to brew it really for a few minutes, not too long. And one of my tips when it comes to brewing any kind of tea, get yourself a glass teapot so that you can see what's going on in there. And then you'll be able to see when the tea gets to about the right color. So you can see it will start to turn that kind of yellowy, greeny color, meaning that it's taking on all the plant's, useful compounds. If it starts getting super dark, that probably means that you've brewed it too long and it's going to start tasting bad. So you want to go for somewhere in between. So the water should have a bit of color, but not too much.
Now, I know that when I make tea, I just have an electric tea kettle that I put with water. I usually add distilled water, and it's a good time to talk about water because distilled water is free of particles. Water contains particulates, and distilled water is very, very pure. Alexander Graham Bell cured himself of arthritis by drinking mostly distilled water. So if you're making your tea from really, really pure water, it's going to taste better. Wouldn't you say, Natalie?
Definitely, yeah. The kind of water that you use is really, really important. So, especially here in the UK, a lot of cities have really hard water. There's a lot of fluoride and a lot of other things pumped into the tap water. So, you want to at least use a water filter. But yeah, if you can, then distilled or spring water is perfect.
Now, how do I know if I'm using my electric tea kettle? How do I know if the water, when it comes to a rolling boil, isn't too hot to damage my tea?
That really depends on the tea. So if you're brewing a fairly robust tea like black tea, that can take boiling water, no problem. In fact, it's best to brew black tea with boiling water. And things like ginger tea also, it's fine. If you boil it, it's not going to do any harm. Other teas, which are more delicate, so certain herbal teas, flower teas especially, are very delicate. And teas like green tea and white tea, if you pour boiling water onto them, they're going to just become very bitter. They're going to disintegrate. They're going to lose a lot of their benefits. So ideally, if you're brewing herbal teas, 90 to 100 is a good ballpark. And for green tea and white tea, even cooler, you want it to be about 70 to 80 degrees.
And I've seen specific teapots just for getting the water to the right temperature for teas.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you can buy really fancy kettles which have loads of different heat settings on them. You can choose to set it to 70 to 80 to 90 to 100, but they are quite expensive. So, not everybody can afford to have one of those in their home. And the other option is to use a food thermometer. You can use a food thermometer to check the temperature of your water before you pour it onto the tea.
Now, Natalie Saunders, author of the wonderful book, The Chi of Tea, what is your advice for when we want to brew the perfect cup of tea? How should we go about doing that?
Well, first of all, you need to choose a good quality tea. That's really important. So, it can be tempting sometimes to go for the cheapest product, which is on the supermarket shelf. But usually, especially in the case of tea, this is not going to be worth it. So some teas can be really expensive, but it's one of those things where the more you spend, the more you're going to get for your money. So, get a good quality tea. If that means that you just treat yourself to one packet, a couple of times a year rather than buying yourself, a new packet of tea every month, then, do that. It's really definitely worth buying really good quality tea. Secondly, you need to get the water to the right temperature. As we've just discussed, you can do this using one of these high-tech kettles, which has all these different heat settings, or you can use a food thermometer. And once you really get used to brewing tea, you can pretty much guess. You can boil your kettle and you can know, if I leave it for 5 minutes, it's going to be the right temperature, more or less. So get your water to the right temperature. I prefer to use a glass teapot so I can see what's going on in there. So measure out the right amount of tea. That's going to depend on what type of tea you're brewing or whether you're making herbal tea. And also to your personal taste as well. Some people like their tea very weak. Some people like it strong. Put the tea into the teapot, pour over the water, and then you wait. And again, the brewing time depends on how strong you want the tea to be and what type of tea it is that you're brewing. So it's very much an art, and it's something that sometimes you have to get wrong a few times before you get right. But once you figure out, how you like your tea, then it's easy to keep it going.
Now, Natalie Saunders, I know that your main profession is as an acupuncturist. When people come to you for acupuncture sessions, do you recommend specific teas for their healing condition?
I tend to give people a lot of dietary advice, and that does include things like teas as well, definitely. I think, people being able to go away at the end of a treatment and, think, okay, I can eat these foods, I can drink this tea, and that's going to help me. It really helps people to kind of have that proactive attitude towards their own healing. Because it would be so easy for people to kind of come in, lie down, have that acupuncture treatment and just go home and do nothing. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. It's a partnership, and the patient has to put in some hard work as well. And sometimes that means making dietary changes or lifestyle changes. And yeah, sometimes the addition of tea can definitely be helpful.
And so many people are dehydrated, as you know, and that really affects your kidneys and your bladder. And yet, if we say to them, "We'll drink plain water," they think, it's too boring. So is tea a good, brewed tea, is properly brewed tea a good substitute for plain water, in your professional opinion?
Well, in my professional opinion, I think there is no real substitute for plain water. I think really it's the best thing that you can drink to rehydrate yourself, because tea contains caffeine. It does have that slight diuretic effect, which is going to make you go to the bathroom more. So it's not going to hydrate you as much as drinking plain water would. However, if you're talking to one of these people who refuses to drink plain water, then obviously any way you can get more liquid into their system is going to be beneficial. So whether that be, by using tea or herbal teas, yeah, definitely it's better than nothing.
And as a matter of professional advice, how much tea do you think we should drink every day? 10 ounces, 20 ounces, 30 ounces. What's your opinion?
Again, it depends very much on the person, on their individual constitution, and what type of tea they're drinking. I mean, I would always recommend varying the types of tea that you drink, actually. So I personally prefer to drink black tea in the morning when I need that kind of extra energy boost. And then in the afternoon, I'll switch to either green teas or herbal teas, just to, mix it up. You can, definitely have too much of a good thing. So by varying the types of tea that you're having throughout the day, you're just kind of avoiding, having too much of any one particular compound.
Yeah, and you're bringing up something really important, which is to avoid heavy caffeine in the afternoon. And the reason for that is that caffeine has a 6-hour half-life. So if you're drinking tea at 4 o'clock, that's going to help, you're going to be okay, because hopefully you'll go to bed, around 10 o'clock. But if you're drinking a lot of caffeine after that, it can actually keep you awake at night, right?
Definitely. Yeah. And you'd be amazed how many people come to see me telling me that they can't sleep at night. And when you quiz them about their eating and drinking habits, it turns out they're drinking, tea and coffee at 8, 9 o'clock in the evening. And you kind of think, well, that's why you can't sleep.
Yeah, that's why you can't sleep. Now, what advice would you give our audience to anyone who has a health condition who wants to try tea as a natural healing remedy?
I would say if you have a long-term health condition, you need to speak to a doctor or a qualified herbalist before you decide to start drinking one type of tea a lot. So if you have a cup, here or there, if you have maybe a ginger tea here and a peppermint tea there and a green tea another day, it's not going to do too much to you. You're not taking in enough for it to have any real effects. But if you decide, okay, I'm going to drink ginger tea every single day, that's when you need to start thinking about it a bit more carefully, and you need to speak to somebody to make sure that's not going to do you any harm.
You've been listening to Natalie Saunders, author of the book, The Chi of Tea. Natalie, any final thoughts for our audience?
Really, just go out there, get yourself some delicious, high quality tea. You know, play around with it, find a brew that you really enjoy, and just enjoy it. It's there to be drunk and to be savored. So just do it.
You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 bestselling author. Find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. And remember, when you drink a cup of properly brewed tea, especially white tea, which is highest in antioxidants, you are taking advantage of one of the oldest natural healing remedies there is. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.